we are creatures that grow from small beginnings, and what we grow into depends on several factors. One is the conditions that surround us, and one is the extent to which we engage with the life within us. For the past probably 20 years more, education has become a strategic issue around the world. You know, when I was a student, nobody was very interested in what was happening in other countries in education. I mean, I was growing up in England. We didn't really care what was happening in Finland. People in America weren't that bothered about what was happening in Spain. But now governments are. Education has become a strategic issue. And it's become a strategic issue because of the nature and pace of globalization. And education has become seen as a process to encourage competition and economic success between countries. And it's led to the most corrupt and sterile form of education you can imagine for our children. Our children are suffering now from higher levels of stress than ever before. More and more kids are not graduating from high school. I hate the expression. Is hate a strong word? I hate the expression dropout. In America currently, something like 30% of kids who start the 9th grade don't complete the 12th grade. And every single child has a reason for that. I mean, there are trends, but what's interesting are not the statistics, it's the reasons individuals have. But, you know, if you're running any kind of enterprise and you lost 30% of your clients every year, you might wonder whether it was the stupid clients or your enterprise. And to call these kids dropouts makes it sound like they failed the system. And it's much more accurate to say the system has failed them. Because I don't know any kid who doesn't want to learn. You know, children are born with immense possibilities, I mean, infinite possibilities, and they have a massive appetite to learn. I mean, think what happens in the first 18 months of life. Children learn to speak. Little babies in the first 18 months learn to speak, and nobody teaches them. You don't. If you're a parent, you didn't teach your child to speak. It's far too complicated. You know, you wouldn't have the time and they wouldn't have the patience. You know, it's not like you sit your child down at the age of 18 months and say, look, we need to talk. You know, or more specifically, you do. And it doesn't work like that. You know, kids absorb language through their skin. You nudge them, you correct them, they mimic you, but you don't speak, you don't teach them. And by the way, if they grow up in a home where there are 6 languages spoken, they'll just learn all of those. Kids love to learn. The problem they have is with education, which is the time when we start to decide systematically to teach them things. And many of the rhythms of education are obstructive to the natural rhythms of learning. So my premise is that children are born with immense natural capacities. They have a tremendous appetite to learn, and education has become the problem. When you say what is the aim of education, I'd put it this way, that, and I'd love to know what Sahdguru has to say about this, coming from a different cultural perspective, but my take on this is this, that all of us are born into 2 worlds. You know, that there's a world that existed before you came into it. It was there before you were. It's the world of historical circumstances. It's the world that exists whether or not you exist. That will be there when you've gone, according to where your metaphysics take you. But there's another world that exists only because you exist. It's the world that came into being when you did. It's the world of your private consciousness, the world of yourself, the world of which it was once said there's only one set of footprints. But the world of your own anxieties, hopes and aspirations and talents and fears and ambitions and so on. Education is filled with the outer world. And most of the problems that children experience are to do with their inner world. So as I see it, the role of education is to help children understand the world around them. That's clearly essential. And also the world within them, so that they can become, you know, compassionate, fulfilled, and engaged individuals. And for me, the great deficit in education at the moment is the extent to which we fail to engage the child's inner world and recognize how much they could become if we invested enough of our time, effort, and own conscious understanding into what their possibilities are.
I'm glad that there's no perfect school anywhere. because this aspiration for perfection is very death-oriented. It's something that most people have missed. The nature of life is, it's never perfect. Only death is perfect. Never has death happened imperfectly. Never has life happened perfectly. If school is about life, then there is no perfect school. Having said that, as someone said, not him, somebody, from England. No, I'm seeing him as a representation of England. Someone said that education is a necessary evil. It is a necessary evil because there is a resident evil in the world. We have very convoluted aspirations in the sense, largely, most part of the education is trying to manufacture cogs for the larger machine that we have built. Our children are the fuel, unfortunately. We have to put them into some slot where they'll function well. And when we see the world is no more about people. The world is about the economic engine that we are driving. It's become bigger than us. We have to keep the engine going. We're scared to stop it for a moment. We have to keep going. Now, the problem is this, that we have created a world, if our economies fail, we will be depressed. If our economies succeed, we'll be damned for good. I feel it's better you're depressed. Now, talking about a school as a way of manufacturing cogs for the machine, there are many ways to do it. Every nation has its own system. If I have to shape you into a particular shape that you must fit into a particular machine, it's a cruel process. But now we can't let the machine fail, it needs spare parts. Constantly it has to absorb, and humanity is the spare parts. So our children are the fuel and the machine parts which go into this to run the larger machine, that's one aspect. So this is why I have addressed education in three different dimensions. There is one form of education which is called Isha Vidya, I think they might have showed something about that. This is for the rural masses in India, where the problem is they are in an economic and social pit which they cannot get out by themselves. The only ladder for them is education, employment-generating education. But there are reasonably well-to-do people where they might have gone through that in the previous generation, but this generation need not think about how to earn my living. They have to look at how to expand who they are. So we have Isha Homeschool, which caters to that, because this kind of education costs money. So only people who can afford it can do that. Costs money means not like how it costs here. By Indian standards, it costs money. And there's another form of education where people are not interested in serving this machine or that machine, they want individuals to blossom. So we have Isha Samskriti, where there is no academic education of any kind. They only learn music, dance, art, Sanskrit language, Kalari, which is the mother of all martial arts, and classical dance, classical music, yoga, English language as a passport to the world. So these children are a treat to watch. This is how children should have been. Just to give you a glimpse of what it is, at the age of 15, for 3 years they go into monastic life. Compulsorily they must go on, compulsorily they must come out at 18. They cannot continue. They'll take a monastic life for 3 years, but after 3 years they cannot continue, they have to discontinue that and get back to normal life. This is for discipline and focus, but you can't make the entire world like that. This is an ideal to work towards. The idea of this kind of schooling is just to develop human body and human brain without any intention. Without any intention as to what they should become. They can become whatever they want. Only thing is, human body and human mind should grow to its fullest capability, and attention is the main thing. An indiscriminate and unprejudiced attention is what we're trying to evolve in the children, that they learn to pay attention to everything the same way, that you don't divide the world as something as good and something as bad, something high, something low, something divine, something devil, something filthy, something sacred. No, you learn to pay the same attention to everything. This is the fundamental of this form of education. What will they do? What will they do is the aspiration. So I guaranteed them one thing, 12 years, if you enter the school, the commitment is for 12 years. You have to, 6 if you come, 18 if you can leave. So they asked me, what will the children do? I said, one thing I'll assure you, we will not give you a certificate in the end. They said, Sadhguru, what? I said, did anybody ask me, what is my certification? Only in the American embassy they asked me. So I said, no certification, because doors in the world may open little slowly for you, but when they open, they stay open. Not because of qualification, but by competence you open doors. It is just that everybody is in a mad race, your children should do better than your neighbor's children. This is a disease.
I agree. I didn't know you're unqualified, by the way.
That's the…
I actually have to go.
That is the only qualification I have, and that is the only striving in my life, how to remain uneducated. Because this is the biggest problem. Why education has become a problem in the world is, people become who they are in the world because of what they have gathered. This is a very unfortunate situation. Right now, whether it is material things or knowledge, whatever information they have gathered, it makes them who they are. Now, who you are and what you have gathered are two different things. This is the distinction we are trying to bring into child's life in our schools. Whatever you may gather, it doesn't matter. What you gather is just information and things. Information is a thing by itself. It should not determine who you are. Who you are is determined by a different process, what you gather by a different process. So when I keep repeating to everybody, lot of these people feel ashamed, my guru is uneducated, they try to say, no, he only says that he's really educated. What I'm saying is, whatever I have gathered does not determine who I am. Because the biggest problem in the world is this, from the day you are born, all kinds of people are trying to teach you something that's not worked in their life.
I think if I can say, one of the major problems, excuse me, I agree with all of that, is that we didn't have systems of mass education as we know them now, pretty much until the middle of the 19th century. You know, they were invented, made up.
Part of industrialization.
Yes, it was part of the Industrial Revolution, and it was associated with the big move from the countryside into the cities to provide a workforce for the industrial economy. It's very straightforward from that point of view. It was a massive piece of social engineering. It's why the system is shaped the way it was. We needed a majority of people to do blue-collar work, which is why we had a broad base of elementary education, and a relatively small group of people to do clerical administrative work in suits, which is why we had a small university sector. And the system was created that way. In Britain, you know, when I was at school, at the age of 11, well, we all took an exam, I'm sure Ian would remember it, it's called 11 plus. And it determined at the age of 11 which type of school you went to, at which sort of high school, a grammar school or a secondary modern school. It was really an IQ test, but people thought it was a blood test, you know, that told them how smart they were. And actually it was just a capacity to do that type of test. And like a driving test, you could get better at it. And I mean, a lot of people were trained to do it, and they got through it. But the consequence of it is that we created this kind of system where there were a small group of winners, and they did very well by it, but the vast majority didn't. And part of the problem, as I see it, is that the system of education is burdened with certain ideological assumptions. One of them is a whole set of ideas about intelligence. So the whole ideal of Western education is to get people to university. And therefore, and it's because the universities abrogated the system to their own purposes. And therefore we have in the system this deeply mistaken assumption that intelligence is the same thing as academic ability. And academic ability is very important, but it's a very specific capacity, the capacity to do certain types of deductive reasoning, certain types of critical discourse. But the upshot is that if you're not very good at that, you're thought not to be very smart. Because the truth is, if you create a very narrow conception of ability, you create a very big conception of disability and inability. I just said, as we're doing personal stories for a second, I'm from Liverpool in England, and I'd mention one thing. I went to school across the city centre from the Liverpool Institute, which is where Paul McCartney was at school. I didn't know him then. I'm sure some of you people do know him quite well. But I wrote a book a few years ago called The Element, How Finding Your Passion Changes Everything. And I interviewed lots of people for the book, one of whom was Paul McCartney. And I tell you this because I think it's very important you don't leave here today unaware of the fact that I hang out with Paul McCartney. Anyway, Paul, as I call him, was I asked him, I interviewed him for the book, and I said, "Did you enjoy music at school?" And he said no, he hated it. I said, "Did your music teacher think you had any talent?" He said, "No, not really." He does, doesn't he? And then one of the other people in the same music program in the same school was George Harrison, the lead guitarist of the popular music group, the Beatles. And I said, did your music teacher think George had any talent? He said, no, not really. I said, well, look, would this be a reasonable comment? That there was this one music teacher in Liverpool in the late 1950s who had half the Beatles in his class. And he missed it. He said yes. Well, it's a bit of an oversight, isn't it? So, anybody stand out in your class this year, Mr. Wilcox? Not really. Nobody leaps forward, frankly. What I mean is, if you create this narrow view of ability, then you automatically suit all this other stuff. I mean, Sahdguru may remember this, but in the 50s, there was a big polio epidemic, that ran right through America and Europe, and I got it. I was one of I'm one of 7 kids. I was the only one in the family to get it, and the only one in the street to get it. Despite my vigorous attempts to cross-infect the entire neighbourhood, I thought you're coming down with me, But anyway, I was in hospital, and I ended up going into special ed from 5 till 11, and that's what they used to do. So I was in a school which had lots of kids with polio, lots of kids with cerebral palsy, partially sighted, blind, deaf kids. I was sitting next to one kid in school who had a really bad case of cerebral palsy. And it's a terrible thing to deal with, because if you don't have it, if you can to move your arms around, you just have to relax muscles and contract them. You don't think about it. But if you've got cerebral palsy, or affected by it, you're fighting your body all the time. So you're doing this type of stuff. And if you try to speak and it's affected your face, you sound as if you're talking nonsense. And of course, you may be talking absolute sense. It's just you can't get the sounds out. Anyway, so the guy sitting next to me in my final year at the school couldn't grip a pencil in his fingers, but he could grip it in his toes. And he had beautiful writing, better than mine, actually. Was this handwriting? We don't know. But the point is, we were surrounded by people like this. I was saying, my classroom at school was like the barroom scene from Star Wars. There were kind of people in various degrees of decrepitude, being brought in. But nobody was interested in what people's disabilities seemed to be. What we're interested in was what they were good at, and if they were smart or interesting or what. And the fact is that many of the things that they had difficulty with weren't what really defined them. But because there's this narrow view of ability, If you have trouble writing or speaking, it's assumed that you have some associated mental incapacity, which is why you get this big conception of disability surrounding it. But if you reframe the conception of ability, suddenly you discover all these talents and possibilities that are inherent all the time. Now, I mention it because it's a dramatic example, at least special ed is to me, of what happens all the time in general education. All kinds of kids are told they've got problems who don't have them. They're created by the system. And it's the problem of the system that we need to address, that if you reframe ability, all of these difficulties that people seem to be suffering from suddenly disappear. If you find the things they're good at, if you do as Sahdguru is suggesting, if you create an environment which is holistic, which is addressing your spiritual development, your physical development, which recognizes that human life is not linear, it's organic, and it will take many different courses, then you have a completely different set of conditions under which people will flourish. And it's the fact that the conditions themselves, which are industrial in character, create problems for kids which they then begin to rail against. So we now have a system based on competition, narrow view of ability, and one in which people are being medicated to stay with the program. They're being pathologized for losing interest in what is essentially very boring stuff. We sit them down all day long and wonder why they fidget. And there are different ways of doing it, better ways. I mean, for me, it's as plain as day, really. Education is not one of those things like an incurable disease and we can't figure out what to do. We know what to do in education. It's about taking this thing to scale. But taking it to scale doesn't mean replicating it, because, as you say, there's no perfect school. Actually, there are no two schools alike, but like there are no two individuals alike. But there are principles you can apply everywhere. And getting those principles in place, to me, is the big challenge now.
As we're looking for an evolution of a human being through the education system, the education system should be always an evolving process by itself. When we think in terms of a perfect school, we're thinking of again fixing it somewhere. That's what needs to change. As one can develop, because Ken mentioned this IQ test, I'm saying, as one can develop muscle by doing certain things with the body, one can develop intelligence. The fundamental aspect of developing intelligence is, right now, there are some studies, I don't know, you must tell me, I'm not an expert on these things, which say if a child goes through 20 years of formal education and comes out with a PhD, they say 70% of intelligence is irrevocably destroyed. Because
Sorry, I have a PhD, I don't know what you're suggesting.
I'll leave that to you, Ken. So, essentially what's being said by the studies is we're mistaking information for education. By deadening the brain with too much information, definitely the possibility of intelligence is lost. This is why I said what we accumulate and who we are should remain separate. Who I am should not be influenced by what I have accumulated, whether they're material things or information or impressions. This is of the world. I would like to little differ in what was said in terms of child's inner world and external world. What we are mistaking to be inner world is still external in my perception, because a child's fears, ambitions, aspirations are all external, inspired or infected, I would say, by the outside situation. It is not natural aspiration of life. Natural aspiration of life, if you look at it, if you leave someone uninfluenced from outside, the natural aspiration is always to expand, not to become less. But if you look at today's form of education, because it's purely intellect-based education, there's no other dimension of intelligence in it. And I think in this part of the world there is a serious mistake that intellect has been mistaken for intelligence. Your intellect can function only with the backing of your memory. Or in other words, your intellect functions with accumulated information. If I take away all your memory, your intellect is quite useless by itself. But there are other dimensions of intelligence within you, which does not need the support of memory. If education systems do not focus on activating these dimensions of intelligence, you will find factory workers, you will not find a genius in every home. What you need is an innovative intelligence. So the point is not about what we have gathered. What we have gathered is useful in creating comfort and convenience for the world. What we have gathered is not useful for creating well-being for ourselves and for the world. If well-being has to happen, we have to access dimensions of intelligence which are not intellectual, because intellect cannot function without accumulated information. If the purpose of education is to expand horizons of individual human beings, you can see that's definitely not happening. The more educated somebody becomes, as people get educated, they really can't get along with anybody. They… not so educated people can live together, 100 people can live together. Once you become educated, you become isolated, because this is the nature of the intellect. Because you're employing only one wheel out of 4 wheels of your car, maybe you're good at it, but nobody else on the street want to drive with you, they will all stop. If you're driving on 4 wheels, everybody will drive with you. So the other dimensions of intelligence have to come, otherwise the moment you get intellectual, unknowingly, in some way you exclude the world. So in a way, the way of our education has been to butcher the existence into tiny fragments, and we're trying to fix the fragments. It's not going to work like that. If education has to become holistic, there are systemic problems, I'm not saying no, but more than the systems, the people who deliver the system, if we can upgrade them in a huge way, every system can be made to work good. So it's the people who deliver that. Whatever the system, if you upgrade the people who deliver this, if the best people… See, if we are interested in the future generations of our humanity, the best people in the world must go into teaching. But right now, the lowest grade of people are going because everything is determined by economics. How much are you paid? That's how you go. So this is where what I'm saying earlier is important. What you accumulate should not determine who you are. As long as that is so, the economic values will rule. As long economic values rule, it's the muscle which rules, not the intelligence.
Several strands to education, obviously. One of them is the curriculum. I'm talking about organised education. I mean, people learn on their own and can learn informally, but if we're talking about organised education, as in the schools that Sahdguru is describing or the schools you've been involved in, there's always a curriculum, which is what we want people to learn. So a big part of this argument is we need a different sort of curriculum. At the moment, in America, for example, we have a very narrow curriculum that's based primarily on a fairly impoverished view of science, technology and math. I say impoverished because math can be a fantastically invigorating and interesting discipline. Years ago, I asked a professor of pure mathematics with the university I worked at how you would assess a PhD in pure mathematics. His intelligence had gone at this point, obviously, you know, but…
Only 70%.
Only 70%. But, but with a small shard of it that was left, I said… No, I said to him, how would you assess a PhD in pure math? Actually, first I said to him, how long is a PhD in pure math? Because I'd never seen one. And he said he'd seen one recently that was 20 pages long. You know, like 20 pages of math. You know, page after page of math with equals at the end. And I imagine I've never seen one. So I said, well, how would you judge one? I mean, presumed it's right. You know, you'd be annoyed, wouldn't you? Spend 5 years doing a PhD in pure math, comes back wrong. See me. And he said, no, they're normally right. I said, well, how would you judge one? And he said there are 2 criteria. There's originality. In other words, it's how creative it is. I'd like to talk a bit more about creativity in a bit, but it's about whether it breaks new ground. But the second I loved, he said it's aesthetic. I said, why does that matter? He said, because mathematicians believe that mathematics is the purest way we have of describing some of the truths of nature. And since nature is inherently beautiful, the more elegant the proof, the more likely it is to be true. He could be talking about a sonata or a dance or a poem. And of course, mathematicians do feel that way. To a mathematician, mathematics is a beautiful abstract language like poetry. And the problem people have is they don't speak math. You know, if you don't read music, if you look at a page of notation, what you see is a visual puzzle. If you read music, you don't see a puzzle, you hear a symphony. And it's the same with mathematics, that mathematicians who speak math see a symphony. And what I'm arguing for, and it's implicit, I think, in what I understand from what I've read about Sahdguru's schools and what he's been telling us, is you need a broad curriculum that recognizes that education has a whole range of functions and that we have to address physical development, spiritual development, our emotional development, and all of that is tied up with a bigger view of consciousness. And therefore you need a school curriculum which has the arts, the humanities, the sciences, technology, not incidentally, not in a hierarchy, but equally and co-equally important. It's important for every reason, and also because for some kids that's where their real lives are going to lie. That's where they will discover themselves most fully. The second part of education is pedagogy, which is how we aim to teach people these things. And I think you're right. I mean, pedagogy, teaching, is the most important part of it. I mean, the reason Sahdguru is having the effect he's having on the world is because he's such a brilliant teacher. Teaching is what this is about. And teaching is not something that can be reduced to direct instruction. Teaching is not about telling people what to think. It's facilitating knowing. It's creating conditions where people will come to understand for themselves by probing them, questioning them, raising their curiosity, probing them so they might go in a different direction, giving them some tools, some techniques, and to reduce it to a process of delivering information to people. I really don't like this language that's got into education of delivering the curriculum. It's like education, some branch of FedEx. You know, it's not. Great teachers know that instruction may be part of it, but the larger part of it is enabling, facilitating, piquing people's curiosity, engaging them, and inspiring their imaginations and seeing the possibility in something. It's a very sophisticated process. And one of the reasons that our education systems stumble is precisely because we've demeaned the profession of teaching. We haven't respected it in the way that we should. We don't compensate people in the way they need to be in order to concentrate on the job and do it properly. And, you know, and the best teachers aren't necessarily the ones with the most degrees. On the contrary. I mean, I know all kinds of very smart people with degrees who can't teach at all. And it's the big mistake that we've made. And the third bit of education is assessment. Well, assessment is important. I can't think of any education process that doesn't benefit by people making assessments of it. But assessment's not testing. Assessment is about making judgments of what's going on and whether it's worthwhile or it isn't and how people are progressing. All great teachers do that. They're sensing whether this is happening or not. You know, and you don't have to give people numbers for that. And what's happened, I think, in America is that we've ended up with a very narrow curriculum which has been compressed because there was a piece of legislation passed here, was it 20 years ago now? Almost, called No Child Left Behind, which is one of the great pieces of modern irony. And what happened was that the government decided that America was falling behind in the international race in education, and the country had to compete, and the children were the foot soldiers in doing this, and that the way standards were to be raised was through standardized testing. It's a terrible mistake to confuse standardization with raising standards, I think. But then what happened was they released this opportunity to the publishing companies. I looked at this recently. So on the one hand, you've got conformity is one of the big principles of the current system. Well, if you want conformity, then you need compliance, and that's what the standardized testing movement's about. And this is a business. That's the point. It's a business, and it's really stifling our children at the moment. In 2013, we looked at some of the figures. The National Football League in America, which is not, of course, football, as we know.
I'm a soccer fan.
Exactly. And we have to call it soccer because they appropriated the word football. It's not right.
Don't tell me you're from Leicester.
What?
You're not from Leicester.
I'm from Liverpool.
Okay.
It's near enough. But you know, it's rugby, isn't it, in armour? So, but the NFL was a $9 billion business in 2013. The US domestic cinema box office in 2013 was an $11 billion business. In the same year, the education, testing and support industry in America was a $16 billion business. It's massive, you know, so it's a business. And that's what's squeezing the life out of our kids. Now, the reason I'm saying this is that governments have taken the view that the way you raise standards is by focusing on the curriculum and on testing. And the opposite is true. The only way you improve education is by focusing on teaching. Because in the end, it's children who are trying to learn. It's students. You're trying to get students to expand and to learn. And that's an expert personal job. As soon as we lose sight of the fact that this is a very personal process of cultivating interest and curiosity and talent and ability and all of those things and an awareness of the world around you, if we lose sight of that and the role of teaching, then we end up in the mess that we're in. But the good news is this can be changed. It is being changed. But I just want to say, too, that a lot of what you talked about, I absolutely, totally agree with. I mean, I agree with most of it. I'm not saying there's some bit I just think is nonsense, you know, but because I haven't heard all of it. But this couldn't be more important.
With a PhD, I expect that.
Exactly. Exactly. I can't grasp all of it. But it couldn't be more urgent, you see. I mean, one of the figures you quote, and I do too, is that we currently face on Earth challenges which are without precedent in the history of humanity. I mean, on the one hand, you have exponential growth in technology and its impact on culture, on economy, on the way that people live. It's revealed all kinds of possibilities, many of them miraculously good. As you said, there are things we're capable of now we couldn't have even contemplated 50 years ago. The big problem is that our spiritual development seems to be lagging a long way behind our technological capacity. There was a really good program on the BBC a few years ago about how many people can live on Earth. It was called How Many People Can Live on Earth? And it was presented by David Attenborough. They're very good at titles at the BBC. But they concluded this, that if everybody, because we all need, you've made the same point, Sahdguru, that we all need food, fuel and water to survive, and air to breathe. And if everybody on the Earth, they concluded, consumed food, fuel and water at the same rate, all 7.5 billion people, at the same rate as the average person in India, the Earth could sustain a maximum population of 15 billion people. So we're halfway there, we're 7.5 billion people. Of course, we don't all consume as they do in India. They said if everybody on the Earth consumed at the same rate as the average person in North America, the Earth could sustain a maximum population of 1.5 billion. And we're 5 times past that. That's on current methods of production and consumption. So we are heading to an abyss here. And if we don't change course, by the middle of the century, we're going to need 4 more planets to make this work. Now, the interesting to me is, as I know it is too, that these problems aren't being caused by the rest of life on Earth, they're being caused by human beings. And it's a problem of consciousness and of creativity. We've created these problems, so we either have to
by reproduction, a lot of people are thinking they're being creative.
What's that?
By reproduction, a lot of people are thinking they're creative.
Yes, that's right. Well, that's right. You know, people talk about saving the planet. And I think the general conclusion has to be, you know, the planet's going to be fine. You know, the planet's been around for nearly 5 billion years. It'll shake us off like a rash. You know, we tried humanity, not so good. You know, we're going to stick with bacteria. They're fantastic. But it's a serious thing. There was a very good observation by H.G. Wells, you know, the science fiction writer, who said that civilization is a race between education and catastrophe. And there's some truth in that. Education in the sense of, you know, developing our capacities, our awareness, and our understanding of ourselves and of each other and of the world around us. If we don't find if we don't take seriously these principles, then we're condemning our children to a very, very bleak future. And the idea that all this can be solved through fueling the profits of the testing companies is hard to comprehend, that anybody takes it seriously. It's a case of terminal myopia. And so to me, it's an issue at every level. It's personal, it's about our children, it's about ourselves, it's our communities, but it's about the larger enterprise that humanity is part of. And it really couldn't be more important. And the principles that I know you embody in the schools are exactly the right ones. It seems to me that that's what this is about. But there isn't a single way to do it. As you said, there's no one perfect school, there's no one particular way to do it. Circumstances vary, but there's some principles. It's about conditions, it's about having a holistic view of humanity, of how children's growth and potential, recognizing the power of teaching, and recognize that you need to get these balances right, and that we can do it. But it couldn't be more important that we get on and do it.
When you think you need to instruct somebody, you have assumed that those whom you instruct are of a lower intelligence than yourself, which is a serious mistake. There is sufficient scientific data to show everybody, every one of us who are 30 years of age are not as intelligent as a 6-year-old child who's just come into the school. There's substantial proof to show that. Only reason why we are looking out to be smart is because we have information and the child does not have information. So we're just showing off this information in the form of instruction. If we bring the teacher training process, completely take away this word instruction and bring inspiration and transmission as a way of life for the teachers, every school system could become a fruitful process, whatever the thing, because I don't believe we can transform all the systems around the world. But in some way, if we bring inspiration and ability to transmit whatever really matters to them, then a child would sit up and listen, for sure. You are a doctor who cannot sing, you're a dangerous doctor, believe me. Yes? You're an engineer who doesn't understand the engineering of your own body, that's why you don't dance. If you did know the engineering of your body, very effortlessly you would know how to move. Education is not a race. 1 year later, what's your problem? You're not in that condition, he has to earn a living at this age. 1 year later, he will go more mature and more complete. So we did this, and the amazing thing is, almost 90% of the parents want their children back in the school. 1 year extra for the same education. But we brought many aspects of leadership, management, business, which are not in the curriculum, and above all, music, art, theatre in a big way. And it's working out wonderfully for the children, they're coming out much more rounded out. And when the school started, the first question that came was naturally, me being who I am, because education is not my full-time involvement. So people said, "So Sahdguru, you're going to give them a spiritual teaching." I said, "Spiritual teaching is for the stupid who lost life sense. People like you," I said to the parents. People like you who lost the fundamental life sense, you need a spiritual teaching. If you allow human intelligence, if you know how to nurture human intelligence without influencing it, because teachers think they have to influence, parents think they have to influence, religious teachers, of course, they want to influence. Intelligence need not be influenced, it just needs to be inflamed all the time. But everybody wants to influence. This wanting to influence human intelligence comes from, I think, in these parts of the world, there is a religious thread in the education system of very strong sense of opposites. Something is God, something is devil, something is heaven, something is hell, something is evil, something is good. This is so strongly set up in people's minds. Naturally, they want to influence because you think they will join the other party. Like how the two political parties in the country look like two religions as far as I'm concerned, the language that's being used on the news channels. In my perception, the political parties look like two different religions to me. This is where I think there is something that education systems in the world can pick up from the East, where we don't have a strong sense of opposites. Because Our gods are devils also, our devils are gods also. Somebody who looks like this is… what is beautiful, what is ugly, you cannot determine in the East because everything is one big happening. I think if you want to nurture human intelligence, this strong sense of opposites have to go. There is nobody in this room who is 24 hours good or 24 hours bad, isn't it? You can confess with me, it's okay. Yes. Nobody is 24 hours good or 24 hours bad. It's just when you're conscious, you function in a wonderful way, when you're unconscious, you may do something lousy. This happens to every human being. Now, instead of recognizing that fundamental quality of the human being and how to nurture this, because the basis of our intelligence is just this, that we can do this or that. If you were another creature which doesn't have the same level of intelligence as the human being has, a tiger will only do that, we know exactly what he will do. A hyena will only do that, a buffalo will only do that, it's all fixed. A human being can do just about anything. That is where the intelligence comes in, that an active intelligence would choose an unconscious and a kind of conditioned intelligence will tend to do a certain thing. The purpose of education is to decondition the intelligence so that it becomes an active intelligence, adapting to the situations, doing the right thing for the situations in which we exist, not positions that we have already taken. That is the essence of intelligence. But today, in some way, education system is trying to condition the intelligence this way or that way because I think there is a strong thread of religion in the background. Though it may not be spoken, I see that everywhere there is a strong sense of opposites, very strong opposites which cannot meet.
I think that's absolutely right. We've… the Western rational view is very much that thinking is a process of making distinctions. It's what the whole logic enterprise is about, it's this, it's that, it's fine chopping, seeing differences between things and making things into categories. I remember writing, the whole… and it's been a brilliant success in all kinds of ways. I'm not saying it's been without its benefits, of course not. We live off the fruits of rationalism all the time. But a really good example to me is this, the whole taxonomic process that developed in the 18th and 19th centuries in the natural world gave us an amazing system of classifying natural things into genus and into species and subspecies. Linnaeus spent a long time figuring out all these different classifications, and if you go to a natural history museum, you see all of this at work. If you go into a natural history museum, you can go into a room, and I've done this, that's got nothing but butterflies in. And it's very impressive. You see all these butterflies in cases against the wall, pinned to the back, dead. But all in species, the big ones at the top, small ones down at the bottom. You go to another room, you see the beetles, not the beetles, other beetles, all classified. And it's a very interesting way to think about it. It's a way of studying these things. But if you leave the Natural History Museum and go into the countryside, you don't see all the butterflies flying in formation with the big ones at the front and the small ones at the back, and the beetles all in some separate part of the field keeping their own company. In actuality, in life, these things all mixed up with each other. They pollinate the environment that they all depend upon. That's the principle of economy. It's about relationships. It's not about separate categories. And, for example, in schools we divide the arts and the sciences. But it's just a device, because in the world, all the scientists I know are deeply affected by aesthetic interests. Look at the work of engineers. Look at the… I was going to want to ask you later, if we have time, about dance. I'm a big advocate for dance. And in most school systems, dance is out of the picture entirely now, because we need to spend more time on math. And I think dance is as important as math. But it's not separate from it. These things are integrated. You can talk about your liver and your kidneys as separate entities, but they only function together. It's the only way it actually makes sense. If you take your liver out and put it on the table, it's not doing a very good job at that point. Is there something wrong with my liver? Yes, there would be. it's out of your body now. It's about how these things connect that matters so much. So I think the better way is to see that thinking is also about making relationships and making connections and not seeing separation. So we end up, for example, in school saying, are you an artist or are you a scientist? It's going to be this or it's going to be that. It doesn't have to be a choice. So when I talk about creativity, I often ask people, I mean, I ought to get a life really, but I do ask people how creative they think they are, large groups. And it's interesting to me how many people who are creatives, so to speak, will also say but they're not really very smart. Or people who think they're intelligent will say they're not very creative. And actually, creativity and intelligence aren't separate. They are functions of the same thing. Creativity is about having fresh ideas, and that's a function of intelligence. So when I say creativity is as important as literacy, it's not separate from it. But creativity seems to me to be the hallmark of human intelligence, however describe it. And there's something prior to it, which is imagination. Imagination is the power to bring into mind things that aren't present. Creativity is putting that to work in some way. But the best evidence of the power of human creativity is that we all create our own lives. Every human life is a unique achievement. There have been 100 billion people, we think, on the planet in the past 150, 200,000 years, and every single life has been different. Every one, because you create your life. Unlike most other creatures. And human beings don't live as other creatures seem to, only in the direct physical world. We live in worlds of ideas and beliefs and values and cultural practices and traditions. And we human beings invented virtual reality long before Oculus. We all live in virtual worlds. It's what the great cultural conflicts are about, when people's conception of the world come into conflict like this. The great religions tearing each other apart over ideas. And cultivating creativity and curiosity seem to me to absolutely be paramount, and it's the starting point of education. You have to help people to see that many things we think are provisional, they're contingent, they can be changed, we can think differently. We don't need to be trapped into our own biography. We can recreate ourselves if we wish to, and that's what, as I understand it, a lot of this work is about. It's giving people another sense, another realm of possibilities that they can come to occupy and inhabit. But it begins by enlivening the capacity to ask questions, the sense of intrigue about the world around us. And it's that gets killed in schools when it comes down to direct instruction, testing and multiple choice, bubble tests. It's the very thing that should give life to education that we kill off at the bottom.
If we have to get into technicality of this, in yoga we recognize 10 dimensions of receptivity. I'll talk about 5 because the other 5 are too esoteric. These 5 are referred to as centers of sleep, centers of memory, centers of imagination, centers of right perception, centers of perversion. It is there in all of us. If it comes something, let's say the same information or a same aspect comes to all of us right now. Somebody is little sleepy mode, some of them are. Little sleepy mode, they will perceive it one way. Somebody is deep into their memory of whatever their experience of lives are, they will perceive it one way. Somebody is in a heightened state of imagination, they will perceive it one way. Somebody is in a state of equanimity, they will perceive it one way. Somebody has taken extreme positions of right or wrong, they will perceive it another way. So whatever I may give you, depending upon from which center you receive, accordingly it becomes that. So you may have 2 children, same home, everything same, all input same, but one will go like this, one will go like that, because every moment how they're receiving what is coming their way. I remembered so well that, this assessment that she was talking about, a big investment in assessment, some 16 billion in assessing children, which is unknowingly grading them. And this grading, life does not respect, only schools and education systems respect. In the end, who does well in the world is not determined by how much marks they got somewhere, but they are given an extra advantage because they got so many marks. So I remember these monthly tests or the monthly report cards that were given out. I would see some children strutting around because they are first, second something, and some children sitting and crying because they're afraid to go home. I don't know what they had in their report cards. As far as I was concerned, whenever it was given to me, I just took it and gave it to my dad. He would open and he would blow. I just didn't know what's happening. This is a communication between my teacher and my father. I never once opened and saw what is written in it. Because I thought this is something between the two of them. Because as far as I was concerned, every test paper I always gave it empty. Didn't write a word on it, or I doodled something. If they insisted, I wrote my name, otherwise I wouldn't write that either. And every time I would change the spelling of my name. Okay? Because the Germans pronounce J as A or Y. So my name starts with J. For some time I wrote it with Y, sometimes I wrote it with W. I tried all kinds of spellings. They said, according to English language, they said a proper noun can be spelled any way you want it. So every test paper, I spelt it differently, as I felt like it. Why I'm saying this is, and when the final test or exam came that I have to go to the next class, my concern was I don't want to be left behind with junior students, I want to go with my friends. So I always passed that one. So people always wondered, is 6 zeros in every test, how do you get to pass this one? I wrote my paper only for 35 marks, which is passing mark. Right through my education, half an hour bell, till half an hour bell in India you can't get up and leave. I'm just waiting for the 30-minute bell. The moment the bell rings, I'll get up and leave. Because by then I've written and I've calculated, I'm getting 37, 36, I'm done, I'm out. Always, if you look at my report cards right through, everything is 35, 36, 37, 35, 36, 37, all subjects. Teachers would beg me, you may know something else, please sit down and write. I said, that's not the point, I got 35. I'm moving to the next class and that's all that matters to me. That's the only concern, that I don't want to be left with younger children. I want to move with my friends. Except for that, I had no interest in anything. This doesn't mean I had no interest in anything at all. I paid enormous attention to every detail of what's around me, with which I developed a certain sense of geometry about everything. By the time I come to 8th standard, my mathematics paper was divided like this. It is 30 marks for geometry, 30 for arithmetic and the remaining for algebra. I never bothered, I don't understand why alphabets and numbers are mixed up. So, geometry I got 30 out of 30, everything else, arithmetic I got 5. That's about it, I went on. Because my sense of geometry is about how everything stands. When I look at the body, I look at the geometry, not at the complexion, not at the shape and form. I look at the geometry, how you're sitting. If I just see how you sit and stand, I will tell you in next 10 years' time what problems you will have with your body. So my sense of geometry came by simply paying enormous attention to anything and everything. It grew to such a point, if I just find a leaf, I could just sit like this for 5, 6 hours at a time. This is one thing I feel we have to bring to our children, ability to attend to something, whether it's important or not important is not your business. My father, being a very high-level academic excellence in his life, being a physician, supposed to be a very strict disciplinarian, which unfortunately or fortunately didn't work on me. Every day, evening 7 o'clock, 9 o'clock, we are supposed to read our textbooks, however uninteresting they are, it doesn't matter. So I would open the book like this. I find a little speck on the paper. This speck would absorb me for the next 2 hours. Without reading a single alphabet, I would sit like this for 2 hours. I wouldn't read a single alphabet on the book, but I would not be looking here and there. I'm totally with the tiny little speck on the paper. I'm saying, This is a big mistake we have done. As I said earlier, we have set strong opposites. This is important, this is not important. I think if human intelligence applies itself to every little thing will explode into a new cosmos by itself. This is what a human being is here for, to enhance life in such a way that no other creature can do it.
The Finnish education system is not based on competition, it's based on collaboration. Schools work together, teachers work together, universities work with schools, with parents. There's no standardized testing in Finland, as in none. Well, there's one at the end of high school. And there's almost 100% graduation rate. And it works. And then people say, well, you can't compare Finland to America. Well, in population terms, it's hard to do that because Finland has a population of, what, 5.5 million? America's, what, 310 million now? But the fact is that education in America is organized mainly at the state level. And there are 30 states in America with populations smaller than or equal to Finland. I do a lot of work in Oklahoma. There are 3.5 million people in Oklahoma. I think Vermont has something less than 1 million. I was in Wyoming recently. I was the only person there. It's just me. Just me and the driver looking for the entrance. So it's not that we should all try to be Finnish and call our capital New Helsinki. It's not that. It's that the principles apply, and the principles are pretty straightforward. One of the things that I want to say is we talked about the Industrial Revolution and the origins of education in the Industrial Revolution, and it is. You can see it. It's about conformity and compliance, but I think the real comparison is not with industrial manufacturing. It's with industrial agriculture, which also developed during the 19th century. And industrial agriculture completely subverted the old organic systems. It was based on mechanization, which meant that you could cultivate single crop farms as far as you could see. And you go to the Midwest, it's corn as far as the eye will take you, or it's potatoes as far as you can see to the horizon. That was made possible by mechanization. The other innovation was chemical fertilizers, which made it possible for things to grow bigger and faster. And the third innovation was pesticides, because once you created these big monocultural farms, they lacked the natural protectiveness that mixed farming creates. So we had to soak these things in these pesticides to keep them from being infested with insects. And it worked, has worked for a while. The problem is that it's destroyed topsoils around the world, which are eroding at a prodigious rate. It's poisoned waterways, it's polluting the oceans, and it's not sustainable. The whole world, we all depend upon a very narrow smear of topsoil, less than a few feet thick, that doesn't cover the whole world, it just covers part of it. Most of the earth is rock or water. And without this, we can't, and it's taken millions of years for this stuff to accumulate. And industrial agriculture is destroying it. And you see it, it's what happened in the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma. It's happened in other parts of the world too. The thing about this system, it's been very successful, but it's completely unsustainable, it's unnatural. Same thing with animals. We're keeping animals in these terrible compounds. We're pumping them full of antibiotics and hormones to make them grow bigger and faster. And because they live in these terrible conditions, they cross-infect, so we pump them full of this stuff. The thing about industrial agriculture, it's all been based on output and yield. And people will tell you that industrial agriculture the interesting thing is the focus is on the plant or the animal. It's getting it bigger. It's yield and output. Organic farming is based on the opposite principle, which is they don't focus on the plant, they focus on the soil. The exact opposite thing. If you get the soil right through natural process of composting and crop rotation, you don't need all these pesticides, and you don't need to keep renewing the soil. It does that itself. And the organic farmers know that. If you get the soil right, the plant will be fine. Don't focus on the plant, focus on the conditions of growth. And the same thing has exactly happened in our school system, I think. We've had these industrial systems. We've been focused on output, on yield. We've created sterile, inhuman conditions in our schools where people are not learning, even though we're getting data and so on. And along the way, what we've done is eroded the culture of learning. And all schools know, and I'm sure it's true of your schools, so if you get the culture of the school right, get the culture right, then things grow. And it's applying those organic principles. And if we can get all schools to do that, then the problem will start to right itself.
I mean, what Ken just now said is the most important aspect, that is, education is not a production line, it's an organic happening. At the same time, from the question she asked, see, you cannot create an education system independent of the society in which we exist, some ideal system. America is America. As he said, some principles from Finland you can take, but Finland is protected by oceans on all sides and it is what it is. And cold also prevents lots of things. America is what it is. Children are not just learning from their teachers, they're learning from the street, they're learning from the culture around. So you cannot ever develop an education system independent of the ecosystem that's happening. Are we as a society willing to in some way cultivate the ecosystem in the society which is suitable for a child to grow up in the best possible way, is a question that all of us should ask. Are we going to do what we like to do, or are we going to be conscious of how this will impact future generations? Every action that we are performing is an important thing that we need to look at. Because educating a child is not just a teacher's business or school's business or parents' business, it is happening all the time. So, a more responsible attitude towards this, a larger consciousness about this, everything that you do our children are seeing, and what will happen to them tomorrow. If they start doing what you did at 18, they do it at 12, what will happen? If what they do at 12, somebody does it at 10, what happens? This is something that all of us need to pay some attention to, because education is not just happening in the school alone. Yes, a certain part is happening, but I think child learns equally from outside as he learns from the school. Having said that, this entire approach of bringing creativity, I think the most important thing that schools are missing out is exposing children to more natural phenomena in the world. They have become an isolated information cocoons of their own. They are living their cosmos through the phone. It's very, very important, I think every school invests in taking their children out, exposing them to natural phenomena and different thought process in the world, different cultures in the world, so that there is a more homogeneous approach to intelligence rather than right and wrong kind of intelligence. Why I'm saying this particularly specifically for American education system is, I see on the national news channel, people use words like good guys and bad guys. If somebody says such a thing in India, he's finished. I'm sure even in UK you cannot say that. But on the national news channel, major anchors referring to people as good guys and bad guys, I'm saying this has to go if we really want to cultivate an organic system where everybody grows to his full potential rather than being a product of a particular system. Thank you.